It's not just the clergy that are rebuking Donald Trump to his face. Finally, Article 3 federal judges are standing up in unison, breaking their silence and telling Donald Trump what they think of him in his attempt at, quote, national reconciliation by granting 1,600 pardons to hardened criminals who attacked our Capitol and beat our law enforcement. Not on their watch. This is the difference between people that are in jail, that could be sprung from jail with a pardon, like Enrique Tarrio, like the head of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, and those that are still in process within the criminal justice system under the supervision of federal judges like Colleen Catelli, Beryl Howell, and Tanya Chutkan, all in the circuit court. I'm going to break it down for you right here. You're on the Legal AF YouTube channel, and here we go. We started in the last 36 hours with the Right Reverend Bud, progressive Episcopalian bishop, standing in front of, I mean, talking about truth to power. This is a lecture to power. This is a bully pulpit to power. Doing it in a thoughtful, articulate, religious, appropriate way, asking Donald Trump to show mercy and grace to those that he can protect instead of punish. Turn the page. We then have the right-wing party representative, right-wing, Donald Trump's wing, in Denmark, tell Donald Trump to go F off in the EU Parliament about 12 hours later. And now we have it sort of filtering into the water supply, the resistance that we've talked about, and is now coming up through Article 3 of the Constitution. Judges, those are federal judges for life. Each one of them having a combination of Jan 6 defendants in front of them because their trial has not yet happened or their sentencing has not yet happened. And in at least two cases, for Beryl Howell, who presided as the chief judge over almost every major grand jury proceeding involving Jan 6 defendants, that's the grand jury, the secret grand jury that indicts with search and has subpoenas and decisions about whether Donald Trump's lawyers are going to lose their attorney-client privilege or not, all that under the auspices of the chief judge of a certain circuit, in this case, mainly Beryl Howell. I mean, now it's Jeb Boasberg, but for the bulk of it and about Donald Trump, it was Beryl Howell. She's got a couple of people in front of her today. Tanya Chutkan, of course, the D.C. election interference court judge, through immunity, had some stern words for defendants in front of her with the kind of a sheepish prosecutors for the now Trump Department of Justice coming forward and asking for dismissal. And the response to that was, I'll give you a dismissal. I'll give you a piece of my mind. And I want to memorialize what's happened on Jan 6th. And I'm going to give the dismissal without prejudice, meaning a future Department of Justice, meaning a democratically controlled Department of Justice could re-indict. No double jeopardy issue for those that are wondering, because you never get to jeopardy. Jeopardy is when a jury is seated. No jury in the post-sentencing, no jury. For most of them anyway. And from a trial standpoint, no jury. So I don't see a double jeopardy problem here, especially for the ones that were not sentenced. And so they dismissed indictments and dismissed cases without prejudice. Let me have you hear the statements that have been made, particularly, just so you know what we're talking about here, and because they're so powerful by these federal judges who are in a proper position on their particular bully pulpit and are now finally speaking out about the disgust they have for the pardons. Tanya Chutkan wrote that the pardons cannot whitewash the blood, feces, and terror that the mob left in its wake, and it cannot repair the jagged breach in America's sacred tradition of peacefully transitioning power. Right? That was some of the most stark. Beryl Howell went one step further, almost like a call and response to Donald Trump, who said it was there should be national reconciliation, and there was a national injustice that he was righting by the pardons. She wrote, no, quote, process of national reconciliation can begin when poor losers whose preferred candidate lost an election are glorified for disrupting a constitutionally mandated proceeding in Congress and doing so with impunity. Quote, no national injustice occurred here, Trump, just as no outcome-determinative election fraud occurred in the 2020 presidential election. That merely raises the dangerous specter, Beryl Howell wrote, of future lawless conduct by other poor losers and undermines the rule of law. And to be straight, they're not just giving speeches at like the American Bar Association or somewhere else. This is written in written orders in cases in front of them for posterity and for other purposes. And to get it off their chest, which is what we're watching the clergy step forward, now the federal judges step forward, national leaders step forward. In the Chutkin wrote, in hundreds of cases like this one over the past 4 years, judges in this district have administered justice without fear or favor. The historical record established by those proceedings must stand unmoved by political winds as a testament and as a warning. Judge Colleen Kohler-Catelli, who's a senior judge, she wrote that she's going to require, I believe, the Department of Justice to put in notes why they're dismissing it so it's established for posterity. She wrote, dismissal of charges, pardons after convictions, and commutations of sentences will not change the truth of what happened on Jan 6, 2021. Thousands of contemporaneous videos, transcripts of trials, jury verdicts, and judicial opinions analyzing and recounting the evidence through a neutral lens. Those records are immutable and represent the truth, no matter how the events of Jan 6 are described by those charged or their allies. What role law enforcement played that day and the heroism of each officer who responded also cannot be altered. You know, Mike Johnson on Capitol Hill was like, well, I believe in redemption. There was a weaponization of events and concerning the terrible time in our chapter. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, said, well, I'm really here to talk on national news about foreign policy. I'm not really here to talk about domestic policy. That was his punt. That was his tell. And Donald Trump asked during a press conference, do you believe that law enforcement should be beaten? No. Well, then how do you explain? And then the reporter reeled off 4 or 5 examples from the Jan 6 defendants of their, not charges, of their convictions for violently attacking with weapons and other things, trying to maim, injure, kill, or worse law enforcement. And said, how do you justify that? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Exactly. Yeah. We have to make them pay. We have to make them pay at the midterms. And this is part of the way that we do it. Let me just read to you from this. Standing up against revisionist history is really, really important. I mean, I've come out and said, for instance, that we need a Jan 6th museum. It's going to have to be built with Democrats, progressives, and fair-minded people, but we need a museum. Just like we have a 9/11 museum, just like we have a Holocaust museum. We need a museum in Washington or someplace appropriate, preferably Washington, to tell the story accurately about Jan 6th. I want the videos running on a loop in darkened rooms and school children watching it and others watching it. I want us to acknowledge as a people what happened. We have a habit of not wanting to do that. It took years to get an African-American experience and slavery museum opened. We still don't have a Tulsa Massacre museum. You know, do we have an appropriate one for civil rights in this country? I'm not sure about that. Maybe the African-American museum, but we need a Jan 6th museum. I want school children to sit in those darkened rooms. I want special counsel Jack Smith. I want the statements by these 3 judges up there. And I want it preserved for posterity in a time capsule trapped in amber. What happened? We have to acknowledge it in order to get the national reconciliation that Donald Trump is asking for. So I'm going to call for that. I try to go for big ideas when I do my thought experiments here on Legal AF and on the Midas Touch Network. It's one thing to call for, humane immigration. It's another, as I've called for, a new Ellis Island project where we turn detention centers into immigration and naturalization centers, like my grandparents came through in the early 1900s at Ellis Island. I'm calling for a Jan 6 museum. I'm going to continue to call for it right here on Legal AF and the Midas Touch Network. So until my next reporting on all things Legal AF, I am Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.